Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Amen. Please be seated. Our gospel today provides us the sometimes uttered phrase, both in seriousness and in jest, "Get behind me, Satan." Or as I prefer in the King James Version, "Get thee behind me, Satan." I think it has a stronger ring to it. This comes about because the answer Peter gave to Jesus regarding who he thought he was focused more on earthly definitions than on the divine. Peter gave the commonly accepted answer, the Messiah, the one God sent to save the world and return Israel to freedom, the fixer of problems. But Jesus knew what was to come. He knew that he would suffer and be rejected. He knew of his coming death on the cross and the subsequent resurrection. When he tried to teach Peter of the true meaning of the Messiah, of what he was to go through, Peter rebuked him. Peter reprimanded Jesus like a father would scold a young boy because he didn't like what Jesus had to say. He didn't accept the divine definition because it didn't match his own earthly one. This strong opposition to his teaching from one of his trusted followers triggered Jesus to respond so strongly, "Get thee behind me, Satan." So in an effort to not trigger that response ourselves, let's ponder those questions. How much time do we really spend thinking about who Jesus is, who he is to us personally? In preparing for this sermon, I gave that some thought. I also wanted to see what others found when they pondered these questions. I read about a church group that in 2018 posed the question, "Who is Jesus?" to random passersby in Union Square in New York City. As you can imagine, they got a lot of different answers. From the obvious, Jesus is a prophet. Jesus is a good moral teacher. My personal favorite, Jesus is a misunderstood space angel. Made me laugh. Yeah. So Google was also slightly helpful. If you type in "who is Jesus," the AI will tell you that he is the central figure in Christianity, the world's largest religion. Okay, I think we knew that. It then does what AI does best, lists things it has found on the internet, defining terms coldly with no soul and no heart. I was also informed that Christ is not actually Jesus' last name. Thank you, Google. It's not, in case you were curious. Jesus poses two questions in the gospel reading. The first question, akin to the one asked of the people in Union Square, "Who do people say that I am?" In other words, what is the popular definition? What would Google have said back then? This is where we hear most people offer up either the popular opinion of who Jesus is or who they have been told Jesus is. Both in the gospel and in New York, people offered several different popular opinions, and of course, don't forget the misunderstood space angel. Then Jesus drilled down to the bedrock of his question. He gets personal with Peter. He asks, "But who do you say that I am?" So let's think about that. Who is Jesus to us? What does Jesus represent in our lives? How does Jesus fit into our daily routines? How do we follow Jesus? The internet, again, coming to the rescue, on whojesusis.com, gives a list of 9 things that Jesus is. They must know, right? Else, how did they get the domain name? The only useful one that I found, at least for me, is the last one, number 9. Jesus Christ, not his last name, will receive you if you come to him. That is who Jesus is to me. That is what Jesus represents in my life, how he fits into my daily routine. Jesus is the gift God sent down, the love and forgiveness manifested in this world. All I have to do is follow him, and I will receive God's grace. But therein lies the rub. What does it mean to follow Jesus? The gospel reminds us that to follow Jesus is to deny ourselves, to go against our most basic human urges. We, like Peter, can proclaim Jesus with our words as the Messiah in one moment, and then rebuke him with our actions in the next. To follow Jesus is to give in to his will and follow the path he sets before us. Easy to say, very hard to do. I remember when I first started meeting with a spiritual director about 20 years ago. I had an idea of what I thought Jesus was calling me to do, and so I began to put a plan together. Someone once told me how to make God laugh was to tell him your plans. I had been in the Navy for about 7 years at that point, so problem solving and executing plans was part of my very nature. I had felt a calling to the priesthood for many years, going back to my childhood when I was a holiday Catholic. But I didn't know what to do with that. When I discovered the Episcopal Church, I found a path I felt good about following. I was no longer conflicted, which was the first small affirmation that I recognized. Through several years of spiritual direction and personal reflection, I realized that I was not in control of that situation. As you can imagine, this was very difficult for me. I was used to being in control, and I was used to planning for the future and executing my plans. Even when those plans didn't work out, I would just develop the next one and execute that one. I heard the call, I answered the call, but I was frustrated because I had no control. My spiritual director reminded me on many occasions that this was something that could only be done on God's timeline, not our own. I was anxious to get started, but frustrated that there was nothing I could do to progress. Once I decided with all my heart and soul that I wanted to follow the path I believe Jesus had set before me, I learned that I had to give over control. I had to go against some aspects of my very nature to follow him. During those early years of discernment and spiritual direction, I slowly began to realize that Allison, my mentor, was right. In order to follow Jesus, to follow God's call, I had to turn over control to him. It took me some more time to actually begin to give up that control, and it is still something that I struggle with to this day. But do you know what I found when I did? I found peace. I found contentment. I found that my ministry in this world wasn't going to start after ordination. It had already started. I was already answering the call to follow Jesus, slowly at first, then more and more as that call became more central to my life. When it came time for me to transfer duty stations again, with only a few weeks' notice, the Navy seemed to severely dislike keeping me in one place for more than 3 or 4 years. My spiritual director and I decided to put my official discernment on hold until I came back to San Diego. After many prayer-filled and tear-filled conversations, we decided this was the best course of action. We were ready to move forward, but the Navy had other plans. It was tough, but I came to terms with it. What helped me? I believe it was God who had the plans. I needed to gain some more life experience before continuing that process. The sense of calling never went away, it just quieted down for a bit. It was okay because I realized I was still following my path. I was still following Jesus. I had learned to follow the path put in front of me, to follow the signpost that God put in front of me, no matter how much it went against what I thought the plan was, or how long a span between those road markers. After many years of struggling with my plans and watching them change before my eyes, I learned to give over my sense of a timeline and turn it over to God. By doing so, I finally gained the freedom to follow God's call more fully. Once all the dust settled, I retired, moved back here to the Bay Area, finished my degree during the pandemic, and found my new church home here. I was finally at peace again and could more readily see the path God had put before me, the path to follow Jesus. That path that led me here and to the Brotherhood of St. Gregory. So who is Jesus to me? Jesus is my center. During my recent retreat with the Brotherhood, one of the brothers described our rule of life as the center of our lives from which all else springs forth. For us, praying the daily office and daily meditations help us center. Jesus is in that centering. When we deny ourselves enough to really listen to what Jesus has in store for us, we are able to move him to the center and let him lead the way for us to follow. Who is Jesus to me? Jesus is my center. Who is Jesus to you? How do you follow Jesus?